Earthlings? Ha! They don't even have weapons. You call this a military? The alien warrior captain, towering over the humans, scoffed. Her blue, muscular frame flexed in her intricately designed armor. Her squad, all equally intimidating, chuckled. Look at them! Not a single visible weapon! No wonder they've barely made it off their little planet. The humans, mostly male diplomats and soldiers, stood quietly, unfazed by the towering alien women. One of the men, a calm and composed diplomat named Greg, adjusted his tie, his demeanor cool. We're more than capable, he said with a faint smirk. The alien leader, Captain Vexera, narrowed her eyes, clearly amused. Capable? Without weapons? Without power? What are you going to do, talk us to death? Where are your weapons, Earthling? She taunted, folding her muscular arms. Greg didn't flinch. We carry our strength in ways you can't see, he replied, his tone steady, almost teasing. One of the alien soldiers stepped forward, staring down at him. She cocked her head, clearly intrigued. What is that thing you carry between your legs? She asked bluntly, drawing laughter from her squad. Is that where you hide your primitive weapon? Is that why you don't need armor? Greg blinked, glancing at his fellow men, who looked equally confused but mildly entertained. What? He asked, genuinely thrown off by the question. Vexera raised an eyebrow. You humans are odd creatures, she said, stepping closer to Greg and towering over him. On our planet, warriors carry their weapons visibly, ready for battle at any moment. Yet you hide something in your trousers. Her voice dripped with mockery. Lady, I think you're misunderstanding something. One of the soldiers next to Greg, named Steve, piped in, barely containing his laughter. That's not a weapon. The aliens erupted into more laughter. Not a weapon? So, it's just for decoration then? One of the alien women cackled. Perhaps Earthlings carry this thing for ceremonial purposes only. Greg remained composed, but his smirk widened. You could say it's multifunctional, he quipped, causing the men behind him to snicker under their breaths. The humor was lost on the aliens. Vexera's grin stretched wider, her sharp teeth showing. Multifunctional? You expect us to believe you Earthlings are advanced, yet your technology is biological? She turned to her squad, shaking her head. How can a species like this survive in the galaxy? They must have been very lucky. One of the alien soldiers joked, twirling her advanced plasma rifle. The mocking continued for several minutes, each alien taking turns speculating about the mysterious weapon they believed was hidden between the legs of human men. The Earthlings kept their calm, only adding to the alien women's frustration. How could these weak, seemingly defenseless creatures stand there without flinching while being ridiculed? You Earthlings really think you can survive an invasion? Vexera asked, leaning in close to Greg. You have nothing to defend yourselves with. Your tiny planet is nothing compared to the might of the Valorian Empire. We could crush you in a day, maybe two if we're feeling generous. Greg shrugged nonchalantly. Maybe we just don't need flashy weapons to survive. Maybe there's more to us than you think. Oh, I highly doubt that, Vexera sneered, turning to her squad. They're hiding something. No species this physically weak could last long in the galaxy. What is it, Earthling? Where are your real weapons? You've already seen them, Greg said with a smile. The aliens looked puzzled. Vexera glanced down at his legs again and frowned. You can't be serious, she muttered. That's what you're relying on to protect yourselves? Greg chuckled. Depends on what you mean by protection. The confusion and frustration grew among the alien warriors, but their arrogance remained. Fine, Vexera finally said, waving a dismissive hand. Mock us all you want. But when it comes to real combat, you won't stand a chance. You'll see. We'll see indeed, Greg said calmly, exchanging knowing looks with his fellow humans. The alien women turned to leave, their mocking laughter still echoing through the room. As the last one exited, Steve leaned over to Greg, shaking his head. You know, he whispered, for advanced alien warriors, they sure don't know much about basic human anatomy. Greg grinned. Let's keep that our little secret for now. So, what exactly do you do with that thing? One of the alien warriors asked, eyes narrowed in confusion as she gestured toward Greg's lower body. Her curiosity was genuine, but her expression remained stern, as if the answer was crucial to her understanding of human combat tactics. Greg, maintaining his calm demeanor, exchanged a glance with Steve, who was trying hard not to burst into laughter. Do with what exactly? Greg asked, playing along, even though he knew exactly what she meant. It was all too amusing. The alien soldier, completely missing the humor, stepped closer, towering over him. You know, that part of your body you seem to carry with such pride, she said, her voice serious, as if dissecting some alien tech. What function does it serve in combat? Greg blinked, deciding to play along. Well, it's not exactly for combat, at least not in the way you're thinking. The warrior frowned, still perplexed. Then why is it so important to you humans? You act like it has some purpose. If it's not a weapon, and it's not a defense mechanism, then why even bother with it? Steve couldn't hold back anymore and let out a small chuckle. You wouldn't believe us if we told you, he said, wiping a tear from his eye as he laughed. The alien leader, Vexera, stepped in, her interest piqued. I don't understand how a species so unarmed could survive in this galaxy. You must have some kind of secret, and if it's not hidden tech, then it must be biological. Your anatomy is confusing. Greg's face remained neutral, but inside he was enjoying every second of this misunderstanding. Let's just say it's multipurpose. Not exactly useful for direct combat, but it has its moments, he said, adding to the ambiguity. Vexera tilted her head, completely serious. Multipurpose? So it serves more than one function? Explain. What is its primary use? Steve covered his mouth, trying not to lose it. Greg took a deep breath, doing his best to remain professional. Let's say, on a good day, it's for reproduction. His voice was steady, but he could feel Steve practically shaking with suppressed laughter beside him. The aliens exchanged puzzled glances. Reproduction? That's it, one of them asked, almost disappointed. No weapon capabilities? No defense mechanisms? Greg shrugged. Depends on how you look at it. It's vital for survival in the long term, just not in the immediate sense you're thinking of. Vexera crossed her arms, frowning. You're telling me that's all it does? Reproduce? She seemed genuinely disappointed. How does that help in battle? It doesn't, Steve chimed in, unable to resist. But you'd be surprised how many humans are still alive today because of it. The alien warriors looked even more confused. One of them, still clearly unsatisfied with the answers, asked, So, how do you defend yourselves? If this part of you isn't for combat, and you have no visible weapons, how do you survive? Greg leaned back slightly, looking thoughtful. We survive through strategy, intelligence, and sometimes just plain luck. You'd be surprised how far that can get you. Vexera's confusion deepened. But you must have some kind of hidden advantage. You Earthlings don't look like you could handle the battlefield the way we do. There must be more to it. Are you trying to trick us? Greg shook his head. No tricks, Captain. We just don't rely on what you think is essential for survival. We adapt, we improvise, and we make the most out of what we have. The alien warriors exchanged more glances, still clearly perplexed. Vexera, however, wasn't ready to give up. You mean to tell me you've survived in this galaxy through improvisation? Greg nodded. That's right. We don't always have the best weapons or the most advanced technology, but we make do with what we've got. One of the alien soldiers chimed in. But you're so fragile-looking. What happens if you're attacked? Surely you can't improvise your way out of everything. Steve, still grinning, jumped in again. Oh, we manage. And let's be honest, you'd be surprised how many battles can be won with quick thinking and the right timing. Vexera's frustration was evident now. This makes no sense. On our planet, strength and weaponry are everything. We're bred for combat, our bodies enhanced for battle. How can you possibly survive against a species like ours? Greg kept his expression neutral but leaned in slightly. We've survived worse. Trust me. Just because we don't have obvious weapons doesn't mean we're defenseless. We've found other ways to hold our ground. The alien warriors were silent for a moment, processing what they'd heard. Finally, Vexera sighed, still unsatisfied but clearly unable to comprehend the human strategy. I don't understand how your species has made it this far, but I suppose there must be something to it. Greg smirked. You'd be surprised, Captain? Vexera shook her head, turning to leave. I still don't buy it. There's got to be more to you Earthlings than you're letting on. As she walked away, one of the alien soldiers whispered to her, Maybe they're hiding some secret weapon we can't detect. Vexera nodded, still skeptical. Maybe. But whatever it is, we'll figure it out eventually. Greg and Steve watched as the aliens retreated, both holding back their laughter until they were out of earshot. Finally, Steve turned to Greg, grinning. You think they'll ever figure it out? Greg shrugged, still smiling. Let them keep guessing. It's more fun that way. The alien warrior women stood in a row, weapons at the ready, their faces marked with determination. Vexera, still fuming from the previous exchange, was eager to show the humans how vastly outmatched they were. All right, Earthlings, she barked. If you're so confident in your survival methods, let's see you handle a real combat demonstration. Greg stood with his arms crossed, appearing as calm as ever. Behind him, the other men stood with an air of nonchalance, as though they were waiting for a casual meeting rather than a military showdown. Are you sure you want to do this? Greg asked, his tone casual but with a hint of amusement. Vexera scoffed. I don't think you understand the situation you're in. You may have survived this long, but you're about to witness what real power looks like. Greg gave a small nod, not bothering to argue. All right. Show us what you've got. With a sharp command from Vexera, the alien warriors sprang into action. They moved in sync, their armor gleaming as they prepared their weapons, each one bristling with alien tech. Plasma rifles hummed to life, energy shields flickered into existence, and the air around them buzzed with the sound of their advanced equipment. The humans didn't flinch. Greg stood his ground, and the others merely shifted their weight, watching the alien display with something close to amusement. Vexera grinned, clearly confident that her team was about to overwhelm the humans in a matter of seconds. Ready yourselves, Earthlings. Try not to get incinerated. The signal was given, and the alien warriors charged forward. But just as they began their assault, something unexpected happened. The humans, who appeared to be doing nothing, started to move in ways the aliens hadn't anticipated. They didn't rely on weapons, instead, they used the environment to their advantage. Steve ducked behind a metal structure, causing one of the alien soldiers to misfire and hit her teammate's shield, creating a ripple of energy that threw off the others. Greg, with a simple sidestep, managed to trip one of the charging aliens, sending her sprawling to the ground in a heap of advanced tech and armor. It was all done with such ease and fluidity, it left the aliens stunned. What are you doing? Vexera growled, her eyes wide in disbelief. The humans were dodging and weaving through the chaos, avoiding every plasma shot with uncanny precision. Greg shrugged. Just improvising. One of the alien soldiers, growing frustrated, tried to outmaneuver Steve by using her jet-powered boots to soar above him. But as she descended to strike, Steve casually tossed a small piece of debris into the air, hitting her in the face and knocking her off balance. She landed hard, her weapon clattering to the ground as she groaned in frustration. Seriously? She muttered, picking herself up while the others struggled to regain their composure. Vexera was livid now. This isn't possible. You're not even fighting properly. Greg smiled, still avoiding every blast and strike aimed at him. Who said we had to fight the way you expect? The aliens, for all their superior technology, were flustered, disoriented by the humans' unconventional tactics. Every time they tried to get a hit in, the humans seemed to be one step ahead, using nothing but quick thinking and the environment to outsmart them. One alien soldier lunged at Greg with a blade drawn, intending to end the game. But Greg sidestepped just as a loose piece of metal swung down from above, hitting the soldier square in the chest and sending her stumbling back. It was pure accident, but Greg played it off like it was intentional. "You're too used to relying on your tech," Greg said, dodging another blast. "Sometimes, all you need is a little creativity." The alien warriors, now visibly frustrated, were beginning to lose their coordination. Their high-tech gear, once an advantage, was becoming a liability as they tripped over themselves in their attempts to overpower the humans. Plasma shots were going wild, shields were flickering on and off, and the once synchronized warriors were now stumbling in chaos. Vexera, still watching from the sidelines, could hardly believe what she was seeing. Her warriors, some of the most fearsome in the galaxy, were being outmaneuvered by a group of unarmed, seemingly helpless men. "Enough!" she shouted, halting the mock battle with a wave of her hand. Her soldiers immediately stopped, panting and disheveled, clearly humiliated. The humans, by contrast, hadn't even broken a sweat. Greg, dusting himself off, walked over to Vexera, still calm and composed. "Told you," he said with a grin. "We managed just fine." Vexera's eyes burned with frustration. "You didn't fight. You just avoided everything." "Exactly," Greg said, his tone light. "Sometimes the best way to win is not to fight at all." The alien warriors, still catching their breath, were in disbelief. How could they have lost so thoroughly, without the humans even lifting a finger in aggression? "That doesn't make sense," one of them muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. "We have the technology. We have the strength. And yet here we are," Greg said, his voice calm but with a hint of amusement. "You rely too much on what you can see, what you can control. But the truth is, sometimes the best weapon is simply knowing how to adapt. Not everything has to be about force." Vexera was silent, still processing what had just happened. She had never seen anything like it. Her warriors, with all their might and advanced tech, had been bested by a few unarmed humans who hadn't even fought back. You really don't need weapons to survive, do you?" she asked, her voice quieter now, tinged with a strange mix of respect and confusion. Greg shrugged. "We survive in our own way. Maybe not how you expected, but we get by." The alien warriors stood in stunned silence, their pride clearly wounded. They had come expecting an easy victory, a chance to prove their superiority over the primitive humans. But now, they were walking away with a lesson they hadn't anticipated. As the humans stood tall, unscathed and victorious, Vexera nodded slowly. "I underestimated you." Greg's smile grew. "Happens a lot. Don't worry about it." Vexera stood there, still reeling from the mock battle. Her soldiers, usually so confident, were silent, a stark contrast to the bravado they'd displayed earlier. The humans hadn't even fought back in the way they had expected, and somehow, they had still come out on top. The whole thing made no sense, and it was gnawing at her. Greg approached, calm as ever, his hands casually resting at his sides. "You seem surprised," he said, a slight smirk playing at his lips. Vexera narrowed her eyes at him. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. "None of you are. I thought you were weak, unarmed, relying on nothing but luck and bluffing. But now, I don't know what to think." Greg nodded. "It's easy to underestimate what you don't understand." Vexera looked down, almost embarrassed. "I suppose we've been wrong about your species. We assumed strength only came from what you could hold in your hands. Weapons, technology, physical power." She glanced over at her warriors, who were still nursing their bruised egos. "But you've shown us something different. Your strength, it's something else. Something we didn't see." Greg gave a soft chuckle. "We're not as flashy as you, that's for sure. But sometimes, survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about being smart, adaptable. Knowing when to fight, and when not to." Vexera crossed her arms, deep in thought. "It's strange to think about. On my planet, we train from birth to be warriors. Everything is about combat, about proving ourselves through strength. It's all we know." "That works for you," Greg said. "And I'm not saying it's wrong. But humans, we've had to find different ways to get by. We're not always the biggest or the toughest in the galaxy. So, we had to get creative. Vexara's brow furrowed. Creative? Yeah, Greg replied. We've learned to use whatever surrounds us, to adapt to different situations. Sometimes, our greatest strength isn't physical at all. It's about using our heads, thinking outside the box. One of the alien warriors stepped forward, still visibly confused. But how can you win without fighting? Without weapons? It doesn't make sense. Greg turned to her, his expression serious but kind. Sometimes, fighting isn't the answer. Sometimes, the best way to win is to avoid the fight altogether. That's how we survive. We pick our battles carefully. Vexara frowned, still trying to wrap her head around this concept. And that's worked for you? Avoiding combat? Outsmarting your enemies? Greg nodded. More times than you'd think. There are plenty of species out there that could crush us in a straight fight. But we've learned to avoid the obvious path, to find other ways to win. It's not about brute strength. It's about surviving. The alien warriors exchanged glances, clearly struggling to accept this new perspective. Vexara, however, seemed to be coming around. She looked at Greg, a newfound respect in her eyes. You've survived against the odds. That much is clear. Greg smiled. We've had a lot of practice. Vexara sighed, shaking her head. I don't get it. I've spent my entire life believing that strength was everything. And now, I'm not so sure anymore. Greg's tone softened. Strength takes many forms, Captain. It's not just about what you can see. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon is the one you don't expect. Vexara seemed to consider this for a moment, her face a mix of frustration and understanding. Perhaps we've underestimated humans for too long. Greg gave a small, reassuring nod. It happens. But now you know. One of the alien soldiers, still holding on to her pride, muttered under her breath. But what about, that thing between their legs? We still haven't figured that out. Greg chuckled softly, shaking his head. I'm afraid that's not as complicated as you think. Vexara turned to him, raising an eyebrow. So it's not a weapon? Not some kind of hidden advantage? Greg grinned. Nope. Just biology. The alien soldiers looked even more confused, exchanging awkward glances. Vexara sighed, rubbing her temple. This whole time, we thought you were hiding something. Something dangerous. Sorry to disappoint, Greg said with a chuckle. Vexara stared at him for a moment, her expression softening. You've given me a lot to think about, human. Maybe strength isn't what I thought it was. Greg nodded. It's different for everyone. But that's what makes it interesting. Vexara's lips twitched into a small smile. I suppose you're right. I'll admit we were too quick to judge. There's more to your species than meets the eye. Greg smiled back. I appreciate that, Captain. Vexara looked back at her soldiers, who were still processing the day's events. We've learned something valuable today, she said quietly. And maybe there's more we can learn from you humans. Greg gave a respectful nod. And maybe there's more we can learn from you. For the first time since they'd met, Vexara's stern expression cracked into a genuine smile. I'll take that as a compliment. The alien warriors, though still somewhat bewildered, began to relax. The tension that had filled the air earlier was dissipating, replaced by an odd sense of camaraderie. As Greg turned to walk away, Vexara called out, Earthling. He paused, glancing back. Yeah? Maybe next time, she said with a smirk. We'll challenge you to something that doesn't involve weapons. Something more intellectual. Greg chuckled. I'll look forward to it. With that, the humans and aliens parted ways, leaving behind the confusion, the misunderstandings, and the lingering questions. What had started as a clash of cultures had ended in mutual respect, and maybe even a little bit of curiosity for what the future would bring.